Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 36, Episode 7, Martin Leake VC. This episode was written by Murray Dahm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. Arthur Martin Leake, serving as a lieutenant in the Royal Army Medical Corps in 1914, was the first man to be awarded a bar to the Victoria Cross he received during the Second Boer War in 1902. In both circumstances, Martin Leake's conduct was to put the lives of his injured comrades first, despite being exposed to constant enemy fire and being wounded himself. Martin Leake is the only recipient to gain his 2 Victoria Crosses in separate wars. Only 2 other men have been awarded 2 Victoria Crosses: Captain Noel Godfrey Chavasse in 1916 and 1917, and Captain Charles Upham in 1941 and 1942. The citation for Martin Leake's second Victoria Cross was not for a single action. Rather, it was for a series of actions throughout the period from October the 29th to November 8th, 1914, during which Martin Leake rescued a large number of wounded whilst exposed to constant fire around the Belgian town of Zonnebeke. Zonnebeke was located at the centre of the Ypres salient and was central to the First Battle of Ypres, fought between October 19th and November 22nd, 1914. There, the British Expeditionary Force, French and Belgian forces faced unrelenting attacks by the German 4th and 6th Armies. Only 9 kilometres from Ypres, Zonnebeke saw fierce and constant fighting. In all, the BEF suffered 54,000 casualties around Ypres, the Germans 80,000. The French and Belgian losses were also very high. On November 16th, the British were relieved of the defence of Zonnebeke by the French. Martin Leake's actions in rescuing large numbers of wounded men from the field did not go unnoticed and could not go unrewarded. Hence the then unprecedented honour of being awarded a clasp to his Victoria Cross, although his commanders were determined that was the only course. When initially the citation was going to have the date range of November 5th to 12th, Martin Leake's Divisional Commander Major General Monroe wired back immediately. Martin Leake performed acts of gallantry every day between October 29th and November the 8th. By 1914, Martin Leake was 40 years old, but his conduct should not have come as a surprise to those who had served with him. Born in Hertfordshire in 1874, he studied medicine and qualified as a surgeon in 1893. As soon as war broke out in South Africa, in October 1899, Martin Leake requested a leave of absence from Hemel Hempstead Hospital to enlist, and he joined the Hertfordshire Company of the Imperial Yeomanry. Martin Leake's 4 older brothers, William, Stephen, Richard and Francis, were all in uniform, and so his enlisting came as no surprise. The tensions between the British government and the 2 Dutch Boer republics of Transvaal and the Orange Free State had been brewing for decades. since their foundation in the 1850s. The British had attempted to annex Transvaal in 1877, and this had led to the First Boer War in 1880 to 1881. British defeats meant the war ended in a stalemate. The discovery of diamonds in the Orange Free State and gold in Transvaal in 1887 only made the tensions worse. The number of prospectors, mainly British, soon outnumbered the Boers. Claims by British prospectors that they had been mistreated led to raids seeking to stir up rebellion by foreigners in the two republics. These failed, as did negotiations whereby the British wanted to incorporate the two republics into a federation which would be controlled by Britain and thereby controlled the gold and diamond finds. An ultimatum to withdraw all British troops from the borders of the Transvaal and Orange Free State was rejected by Britain, and the two South African republics declared war on October 11th. The war, at first, went spectacularly well for the Boers. They launched strikes into the British territories of Natal and the Cape Colony, and besieged the garrisons of Mafeking, Ladysmith and Kimberley, and then won a series of victories in what became known to the British as Black Week. This saw defeats of British forces at Stormberg, December 10th, 1899, Magersfontein, December 15th. Things were made worse with another defeat for the British at Spion Kop in January 1900. The arrival of British reinforcements from all across her empire allowed the sieges to be relieved and swung the war in Britain's favour. British forces invaded the two republics, capturing the capital of Transvaal, Pretoria, in June 1900. Thereafter, the Boers conducted guerrilla warfare against invading British columns. The British conducted a scorched earth policy to combat these tactics, and also ran down individual Boer leaders and their commandos, voluntary militia. Martin Leake, Trooper 5778, was training in Watford and received the news of the defeats and relief of Kimberley and Mafeking whilst waiting to embark for South Africa. He had been so impatient to enlist, he had done so as a trooper rather than as a medical officer. He boarded ship for South Africa on March 3rd, worried that the war would be finished before his arrival. He boarded the steamship Cornwall for the 4-week journey with 654 men and 190 horses. Landing on March 28th, he proceeded to Stellenbosch, the main British camp in the Cape Colony, and in May joined the 100,000-man advance on Pretoria. The yeomanry were 4 days behind the main march, but still saw some action. Martin Leake wrote home, in a tone of adventure-loving excitement, "The exciting times we are in at present make up well for our past troubles. I am in the very best of health and enjoying the fun." Martin Leake was attached to the Royal Army Medical Corps as a civil surgeon in October, but he soon became bored and contemplated giving his notice, since he was a local civil appointment. Soon, however, he learned of a new force being set up, the South Africa Constabulary, ESA. Its commanding officer was Major General Robert Baden-Powell. This was to be a military force, rather than a policing one, as the name might suggest, 10,000 men strong, and to be ready by June 1901. Only single men aged between 20 and 35 were eligible, as the force was intended to trek long distances and chase down Boer leaders, especially the elusive overall Boer commander, Christiaan de Wet. They were also required to man a line of blockhouses on the borders of friendly territory. Baden-Powell designed the uniform for the SAC himself, and later used it as the basis of the uniform for the Scouts movement. To each troop of 100 men, a medical corporal was attached, and a doctor was assigned to each area where troops might operate. Martin Leake signed up to the SAC as a doctor in May 1901. Despite not enjoying the conditions, he stayed on, especially at the prospect of doing field surgery. By the end of 1901, he was a travelling medical officer, looking after 50 miles of sack lines. He complained in early February that the situation was a farce. The territory behind them, which was supposed to be free of Boers, was full of them. On the February 8th, 1902, a patrol of 150 men of the SAC, with Surgeon Captain Martin Leake, set out from their base at Cyferfontein to track a Boer commando, Commander Pierre Viljoen. At the Van Tondershoek farm, they came upon the guerrillas, who outnumbered them in a hollow, and the two sides began to fire upon each other. The SAC began a fighting retreat back to Cyferfontein. A group of 40 Boers advanced along a dried-up stream bed, a donga, and put the left flank of the SAC under fire from a distance of 100 yards. The SAC flank was commanded by Lieutenant Thomas Abraham, and Martin Leake began to see to the wounds of the men in the firing line, under fire himself all the while. Lieutenant Abraham was then shot, and Martin Leake moved to dress his wounds, but saw that the officer had been mortally wounded. Soon all 8 men were wounded, but Martin Leake continued to tend their wounds, moving from man to man. As he moved to one group, a volley from the Boers caught him and wounded him 3 times in the right hand and left thigh. The remainder of the SAC left flank withdrew, unable to take their dead or wounded with them. The Boers advanced and, coming upon the wounded group, expressed regret at having wounded the doctor. The wounded troopers and Martin Leake lay for hours, the doctor refusing to drink any water, while the wounded still needed care. The SAC withdrew 7 miles to their blockhouses. The battle was the most severe of any they fought. 2 officers killed, 6 troopers dead, and 10 wounded, including Martin Leake. The SAC wounded were recovered as the Boers melted away, and Martin Leake was sent to Heidelberg. His thigh wound responded well, but his hand wound required him to travel to England. Martin Leake recuperated in England and had been there only 4 weeks when his Victoria Cross was gazetted on May 13th, and he received the medal from the King on June 2nd. He underwent surgery to his hand soon after, but it was not an unqualified success. His right hand remained somewhat inflexible, although it did not prevent him practicing as a surgeon. He joined the Bengal Nagpur Railway in 1904 as its doctor, reassured by his brothers that little surgery would be required. He stayed there until 1912, when he volunteered with the British Red Cross to serve in the Balkan crisis. Heading to Montenegro, the Balkan crisis saw the states of Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Greece and Bulgaria war with Ottoman Turkey for more autonomy. Martin Leake arrived at Antivari to set up a hospital in a tobacco factory. He was present with the field hospital at the siege of Scutari and the fighting around the fort of Tarabosh. At the cessation of hostilities in May 1913, Martin Leake made preparations to return to the Bengal Nagpur Railway. News of the outbreak of war reached India on August 5th, 1914, 24 hours after Europe went to war. Martin Leake immediately gave his notice and made arrangements to serve. He left his Victoria Cross in his Calcutta accommodation. After all, the war would be over by Christmas. He caught the first train to Bombay and then the first steamer which stopped at Malta. He arrived in Paris in late August and there joined the Royal Army Medical Corps at the British Embassy. This was despite his hand injury having rendered him unfit for military service. He was attached to the 5th Field Ambulance with the 2nd Division. By then, the British had retreated from Mons and were falling back from the unrelenting German attacks. Martin Leake joined his unit the day before the Battle of the Marne, September 6th to 12th, took place, followed by the Battle of the Aisne, September 12th to 15th. Thereafter, the race to the sea began, and by mid-October, the 5th Field Ambulance was in Ypres. There, they participated in the Battle of Langemarck, October 21st to 24th, and the Battle of Jaliveld, October 29th to 31st. From there, Martin Leake moved with an advanced dressing station to Zonnebeke to continue 3 weeks of continuous action and to Martin Leake's 2nd Victoria Cross. Martin Leake never spoke of his courage, even when pressed, and his family learned of the bar to his Victoria Cross from the London Gazette the following February. This was despite a constant stream of informative letters home to his mother, no matter where he was stationed, and he just never mentioned his own exploits. Indeed, he never wore a complete set of his medals. Martin Leake continued to serve with the same unit in November 1915, when he was sent once more to the Balkans. He returned to France in March 1916, taking command of his own field ambulance in March 1917, in time for the Arras campaign. From there, he returned to Ypres in July, and his service contract with the RAMC expired in September that year. He soon returned to India. He also became fascinated with flying. He had attempted to join the Royal Flying Corps in 1916. He married late, in October 1930, although his wife died in 1932. He retired home to Hertfordshire in 1936 and set up the local Home Guard unit during World War II. He died at home in 1953, the last of his siblings. Willie Leake, on seeing his brother in Johannesburg in 1902, said, "He has done well out here and seems to be popular and very well thought of. Many VCs have been given for far less, and he certainly deserves one. He performs the task that comes to hand without the slightest thought of self. The path of duty is the only road he knows." From what I saw of him, I should think that anything like personal physical fear is absolutely unknown to him when there is duty to be done. That was in fact an anonymous assessment of Martin Leake by one of his Red Cross colleagues, but written later in 1915. The citation for his clasp read as follows: "For most conspicuous bravery and devotion to duty throughout the campaign, especially during the period 29th October to 8th November 1914, near Zonnebeke, in rescuing, whilst exposed to constant fire, a large number of the wounded who were lying close to the enemy's trenches." Thanks once again, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Dahm, read by Nick Barker.